Good afternoon. I'm CEDA Associate Director Clint O'Brien. Welcome to this, the third event in our 2021 Mental Health Series, Implementing Reforms and Improving Outcomes, where we'll be discussing the implications of announced reforms and record investments in the sector and consider the practical way forward for those delivering services. Today's event is part of CEDA's ongoing work with its members to answer one of three critical questions my national team and I lead work on. How can we build vibrant Australian communities? As you might imagine, that encompasses health, aged care, social services, and today's topic of discussion, mental health. We do live in a time where mental health services are being called upon more than ever before. Most of you will know that it's estimated that as many as 1 in 3 Australians will suffer from mental health and mental illness in our lifetime, which makes support and outcomes for patients a critical social and policy matter. For those of us who have already had our turn and experienced mental illness firsthand, our lived experience tells us that many of us experience things differently, that there are gaps in the system, that prevention is critical, and that nothing beats the support of professionals and loved ones. Earlier this year, I experienced mental illness myself for the first time, and in a pretty severe way. Many of us never think we'll find ourselves in that position, and when we do, struggle to comprehend it, speak about it, and seek and find the right treatment and support. Diagnosis, therapy, and medication, combined with other services delivered in a range of ways, and the support of our loved ones saves lives. It certainly saved mine. If it wasn't for some excellent doctors, my partner, my dad, and my dogs, I wouldn't be joining you here today. Now, I don't tell you that story to be self-serving. I tell you that story because, like many, I genuinely believe that by sharing our experiences, we remove stigma and slowly but surely open the door for others to step through and seek the support that they need. Today, we'll be discussing how organisations and professionals providing care are stepping up to meet the challenges faced by those in need, and what the future holds for their strategies to do so, for their workforces, and most importantly, for improving outcomes for patients. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge that we meet today on Aboriginal land and thank the elders and custodians of this land for 65,000 years of taking care of the great country we now call home. Today, as with all CEDA events, you'll have the opportunity to interact directly with our speakers through the Q&A portal and using the Pigeonhole app. You can either enter the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at and using the passcode Health Outcomes, or use the portal beneath the viewing pane on your screen. You can post your own questions in there and vote on questions that others have put forward. You can also join the conversation on Twitter by following CEDA at CEDA_News and using the hashtag mental health reform. I'd like to thank in advance our speakers today, John Brogden AM, Dr. Leanne Beagley, and Professor Helen Christensen AO, for speaking with us and sharing their expertise and insights with us all. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Tim Marney, the Chief Economist at the Nous Group, who we've been working on with Nous as a series across this content right across the year. Tim will introduce our speakers properly and kick us off with some of his opening comments and thoughts to get us underway, and we'll then hear from each of our speakers with their pre-prepared comments and move straight into discussion and your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tim now. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Clint, and a very sincere thank you for sharing your lived experience. I too have lived experience of mental health issues and indeed have a son currently in hospital under treatment. So it affects so many of us. And that's why it's so important. And it's so important that we consider the future of mental health services and treatment and supports. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and echo your acknowledgement, Clint. I would also acknowledge all of those impacted by mental illness and suicidality. Welcome everyone to CEDA's live stream Mental Health Implementing Reforms and Improving Outcomes. This is the third in the series, and we'll focus today on, well, we've heard from decision makers at a political level early in the series. We've heard from advocates. We've heard from service providers in terms of what reforms are required, what the future of mental health and mental health services and supports needs to look like. today we're going to focus on the pretty practical implementation elements of that in terms of what does it mean for services? What does it mean to have a better connected system? What does that look like? What does it look like for service providers and their operating models? And what does it look like for workforce? And what do we need in terms of future workforce? These are some of the challenges that are the practical realities of implementation of reform. So I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers today. Firstly, I'd like to welcome John Brogden AM, patron of Lifeline Australia and president of Lifeline International. Welcome, John. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Leanne Beagley, Chief Executive Officer of Mental Health Australia. Welcome, Leanne. And finally, I'd like to welcome Scientia Professor Helen Christensen, AO, Director and Chief Scientist from the Black Dog Institute. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
So let's get cracking. And let's start, John, with your views on what the future looks like for service and support providers in the mental health system.
Thank you very much, Tim and Clint and CEDA, for the opportunity to join you today and for your initiative and direction in having this series and having it in such an important public and open way. I'll join you in acknowledging the Indigenous lands on which I meet. And I want to also acknowledge those with lived, or as I like to say, those also with living experience. I have depression, I have suicidality. I will probably live with those for my entire life. So my experience isn't in the past, it's intense, it's past, present, and certainly future. Look, I'm an optimist about the trajectory of mental health in Australia. You can be a pessimist if you like, but I take Winston Churchill's approach. He said that democracy is the worst form of government except for every other form of government. And my view is we've got the worst mental health system in the world, probably with the exception of every other mental health system in the world. We are getting better all the time. And we are seeing commitments at a political level, at a bureaucratic level, at a funding level, and at levels in the private sector as well that were unthought of 5, 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago. So I'm an optimist that we are very much heading in the right direction. We are seeing significant commitments of funds, not enough yet, there's no doubt about that, but I think a year or two ago, and I'll be fascinated by Helen and Leanne's view on this, I think we ran the risk 2-3 years ago that policymakers were about to tell us, oh, we've thrown a lot of money at this issue. It's all fixed now. It's all fixed. You know, there was no money 10 years ago. Now there's lots of money. It must be fixed. I think the extraordinary advocacy of many individuals and organisations, the way we live, the fact that both Tim and Clint, in somewhat randomly, if in terms of two people drawn just out of the blue, have talked about not only their own, but in Tim's case, his son's mental illness. And Tim, I hope he's getting good care and getting better. The fact that it is so widespread that 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of us will have a mental illness at some stage in our life, we are seeing a normalisation of mental illness. And that's very important. It's very important that it's normal that somebody can have a mental illness. It's not out of the ordinary, it's not wrong, it's not weird, but it's normal. There are some things we don't want to normalise. We never want to normalise suicide, but we do want to normalise mental health, if I can put it in those terms. And in doing so, I think we are able to continue to push for reforms and to increase funding. I wanted to say that of the many things that are happening, what we must do is look at what COVID has done for mental illness. Lifeline's experience in COVID has been fascinating. Our call 2 years ago, we were getting 2,400 calls on average a day. At the peak of COVID-2 in August this year, we got up to as high as 3,600 calls. That's a 50% increase in our calls. We're still getting 3,300, 3,200 calls a day at the moment. At the same time, we saw massive demands on the mental health system across Australia and in many different ways. But at the same time, in 2020, Australia experienced a 5.4% reduction in suicide. So how is it possible that in the world's biggest pandemic in 100 years, where our physical health was so challenged and continues to be so in many countries, that we were able to see a reduction in suicide? It's one and one only measure of mental illness, of course, but we saw a reduction, but we did see people reaching out. So I'm hoping my hypothesis holds, which is we've been telling people for years and years and years it's normal to be mentally ill. Please reach out and get the help when you need it. And they did. That put pressure on the system. It reminded us that the system needs more reform and more funding. But it was a clear demonstration that people were reaching out in a manner where they would not have reached out, in my view, 10 or more years ago. And in many cases got help they need, so that people did stop short of suicide. And those figures are very clear. A 5.4% reduction in suicide in 2021 is an enormous change in the trend, without a doubt. If you ask me what is the biggest single area for reform in mental health in Australia, if I had to put it in simplest terms, I'd say it's closing the gaps in the stools between the services, fixing the lack of connectedness. And I think that is where we need the funding and need the systems and need the people, need the staffing and need the direction in order to ensure that people can transition through the service in a way they transition from a GP to a specialist to a surgeon and back down again, if I can use a very simple physical health example. We don't have those connections well enough wired in mental health. So far too many people fall between the cracks, and the cracks can be very big and get lost, and their mental health suffers as a consequence. So I'm an optimist because in my time in public life, before this in politics, I've seen mental illness get on the agenda in a manner never, I think, considered by many. And the message of hope needs to be very strong, and that message of hope needs to be backed up by the services that provide that hope. You there, Tim?
I think Tim might have dropped off on us from a bit, John. So why don't we cruise straight along and head over to our next speaker. Tim has the plan in front of him. I don't have it in front of mine, but I'm pretty sure that we had Dr. Leanne Beagley next. So let's stick to that plan. Let's hear from you, Leanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clint and CEDA and Tim and Nous and John for setting the scene. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to start by acknowledging the owners of the traditional land on which we're meeting, the traditional owners. And for me, that's in Canberra on Ngunnawal country, where we acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge those living with mental illness and those who love and care for them, and thank those that have spoken today about their own mental ill health, and thank them for their courage. Those with lived experience of mental ill health are the heart of our mental health ecosystem, and their voices are the heartbeat for the future of systemic, lasting and genuine reform. Well, never waste a crisis. Learn from the evidence and what's happened. Value and harness the voices of lived experience. These are 3 points that we need to focus on from the last 18 months. Learnings that we need to take into 2022 and beyond to improve and reform our mental health ecosystem for all Australians. At Mental Health Australia, we're proud to advocate for national mental health reform, and in doing so represent more than 120 mental health organisations who themselves represent a further 1,250 organisations. So with this in mind, thank you to CEDA for the welcome, and thank you on behalf of all of our members and the wider mental health ecosystem for the opportunity to participate today. Did you know that it's been more than 600 days since the World Health Organization announced the global pandemic on the 11th of March 2020? And as the world has adapted to the crisis at hand, here in Australia, our mental health system has had to bend, break and be reborn in some instances to handle the increased need and the demand on services. And we heard from John just an example of how big that's been. From our political and business leaders, the phrase "never waste a crisis" has been a popular mantra to find meaning in the pandemic. But as many people in the mental health sector know, our system was already close to crisis before March 2020, and it had been for some time. Even the World Health Organization had long acknowledged that the global crisis at play with the Mental Health Action Plan that they developed in 2008, highlighting the need for integrated and responsive care that focuses on meeting both the mental and physical health needs of individuals. At Mental Health Australia, we believe that any mental health system that needs to comply with the World Health Organization's Right to Health agenda needs to balance biomedical and psychosocial models of mental health care. This means a well-designed mental health system facilitates integration and coordination of promotion, prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, care and recovery services. And by integrating mental health services with primary and general health care, the focus is shifted to early identification and intervention, whilst addressing the underlying social determinants of health. In Australia, the enduring mental health crisis and the need to fix it was certainly nothing new to those within our mental health ecosystem, and for the many who have advocated for change over the last decade, or decades or more. So with a global health crisis on top of an existing crisis in relation to our own mental health system, the idea of not wasting the opportunity to change our system is crystal clear. So if not now, then when, if ever? How then should we tackle this double crisis? By using our experience and the evidence of what we know works best. Just like the evidence that informed the basics of our pandemic response plan, simple practices such as isolation, quarantine, physical distancing, washing hands, wearing masks. Proven health measures from centuries and pandemics past. For the mental health response in Australia, in terms of responding to need, but also the impact on the economy and the workforce, we were in a fortunate position because we had a head start. That is the Productivity Commission inquiry into mental health. The PC inquiry from 2018 to 2020 galvanised our sector to respond through countless consultations, submissions and reports outlining just how we should look forward and look at dealing with a national, efficient and effective and productive approach to mental health reform. Mental Health Australia, we had already done some work in this space. People might remember the work Investing to Save, which you can find on our website. In addition to it, add in additional reports, at national, state and territory levels and additional royal commissions and so on, we now have more than enough collective wisdom and evidence from our sector at a time when we need that direction and strategic understanding the most. The PC inquiry has given us the direction and tools to help us through this crisis. And whilst there's no doubt that some of the themes and ideas stemming from it have already started to receive some much welcomed funding, the National Agreement for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention must outline how the systemic national reform piece completes the puzzle. Of course, that's not going to be easy, but if the generational reform for our mental health system is to be achieved, we are to maximise the change possible brought on by the pandemic, then governments must work together and do the hard work. They must close the gaps in the system and reduce duplication across jurisdictional borders. In tight fiscal times, they must understand what the returns on investment are and where the savings can be made. And they must embed lived experience at the heart of reform. To do this, there must be a clear and productive national agreement from the start, and the ball is in the court of all the governments to make this happen now. The national agreement needs to be underpinned by meaningful and accountable bilateral agreements and a governance structure that encourages consultation and real performance monitoring. What we do collectively for our mental health system today, tomorrow and in the coming weeks and months will not only help insulate many from the current challenges they face, but also has the potential to provide lasting supports to the many Australians who will need them and our sector in the years to come. So what makes the PC inquiry so critical and such an important piece of evidence we cannot waste? Well, firstly, it places people with mental ill health and the people who love and care for them at the heart of the reform agenda. Secondly, it takes a life cycle and social determinants approach recognising that both developmental life stages and the context in which people live impact on mental health and well-being, and that mental health responses need to take these circumstances into account. And thirdly, it recognises that system reform will require a broad set of actions across a range of domains over a period of time and with clear coordination, strong leadership and real accountability. Mental Health Australia fundamentally supports these three themes and urges governments to prioritise investment in expanded and integrated community-based mental health care options to implement the change. If we are to make the most of this opportunity for change and the body of evidence that we've all contributed to, then it's urgent that the mental health ecosystem, including consumers and carers and governments, work together to design a better community mental health system, including but not limited to psychosocial support services. A real commitment to this must be at the heart of the national agreement. The opportunity for true reform is now, and we can't waste it. Thank you so much for having me today. I'd like to hand over now to Professor Helen Christensen.
Thank you, Leanne. Over to you, Helen.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm on Gadigal land today, and I pay my respects to the owners of the land that I am on. So I started thinking about this, and the name or title of this 5-minute introduction is The Land of Limbo. So Ted Levitt, who's a former editor of the Harvard Business Review, argued that the ability to come up with brilliant ideas, novel ideas, can actually be quite destructive because they often fail to take account of the practical matters of implementation. We can be inspired in our organisational cultures, but this often leads to the lack of purposeful action. And by analogy to the political system we find ourselves in, it is clear that the presence of big ideas will not evolve into better outcomes without effective implementation. Levitt famously said, "Ideas are useless unless used. The proof of their value is in their implementation, and until then, they are in limbo." So today, I guess the central tenet of what I want to say in 5 minutes is that the poor implementation of many of the good ideas that have come from the Productivity Commission and other recent government reports are palpable. Has the implementation been good? Has the rubber hit the road yet? Are we in the land of limbo? And I believe these recent government reports are full of very good ideas about how to change and improve mental health services in Australia. We've all contributed to them. We all think it's fantastic. But the implementation of these ideas is at best poor and at worst wasteful. So why is the implementation of these ideas so poor? What are the barriers to good implementation? And if you look around the political climate at the moment, there's lack of appetite for some projects, but not for others. If a project's complex, it's often pitched to be too hard, the national agreements, for example. Projects resting on assumptions that are no longer tenable because the required vital infrastructure or workforce capacity simply doesn't exist. I think Leanne was addressing some of these issues here. Projects fail to adapt the data and technology transformations that have been so much part of our business environment. And projects are often predicated on old ways of doing things, the old models of care. There's still the domination of the medical model of care that's not appropriate for our area. And, we have new knowledge about the social determinants of health and the importance of community in being able to deliver services. Now, of course, the mechanism by which the good ideas come into play is through the budget. And many of these good ideas don't get up in the first place because the budget hasn't been supporting them. But even when the budget does support good ideas, I think we really have to say the rubber hasn't hit the road. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of this. The first is in prevention research or prevention activities. So prevention is really addressed in the Productivity Commission and many of the other products that have come out of these great reports and ideas. We know that mental health contributes 12% of the overall burden of disease, and that around about 8% of government funding is shifted towards this burden of disease overall. But only approximately 1% of the total government health expenditure is focused on the prevention of mental illness. Yet we have evidence that prevention can be highly effective. You know, for example, in schools, intervening early as a form of primary intervention. Has the rubber hit the road in schools? No, it hasn't. Look, you might call them easy opportunities, but there are opportunities there that really need hard work. But, you know, there could be a universal curriculum that can address at various stages of the lifespan the problems of our young people, what they face in primary school, in high school. We can be looking at preventing anxiety, depression, eating disorders way before they actually emerge. And currently this hasn't been implemented. Rather, the goal seems to be to introduce more counsellors to hold back the tide of the mental health problems that emerge late and could have been addressed by early prevention activities. The second area I want to address is digital services. And the reports do speak to the importance of digital services for mental health. Funds have been assigned to improve, for example, the Head to Health service, and some organisations like Black Dog Institute, Beyond Blue, Lifeline have been provided with funding in order to be able to respond to the mass of people who are calling out for help during COVID and before COVID. And it's a good idea, you know, it's a really good idea. Let's think about the implementation of this. The Head to Health platform currently is essentially about providing doors to services that are approved by government or linked to government services. So in a way, it's like, here are the doors, here are the services. And as Leanne mentioned, there is no backup relationship between what happens when people go through a particular door to how they're going to integrate into the mass of mental health services that we do have. So we need a new model of collaborative care that takes advantage of the digital opportunities that we have. This requires new ways of doing treatment, but doesn't just rest on one therapist or a one-to-one relationship. It requires peer workers, social support, community agencies, and digital is just one mechanism by which this can be put together. It relies on workforce, more therapists, but also training of mental health people that we have now, and bringing in the broad range of people, youth workers, peer workers, community workers who can provide both support and assist in treatment. So has the rubber hit the road? The rubber has not hit the road. And do we care? I mean, why do we care about this? And I think there's two really important reasons. The first is we spend money on other things and we have an opportunity cost in terms of the other important initiatives that could well prevent the impact that have on high-level treatment services. But more importantly than this, it actually affects equality. And I think what we're doing in the implementation of those parts of the system that we're implementing in is actually creating more ground for private services so that more well-heeled people can pay for the best quality services. They don't have to meet the gap funding for, say, psychological services. And also, like we're seeing in even the property market, there's more young people, women, elderly, and diverse communities that will suffer because we are not providing the breadth of services that are going to be directed to those individuals who need it, regardless of income level. The gap is widening, and I can't see how our implementation strategy is actually addressing this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you also, Leanne and John. Some pretty significant issues there in terms of implementation. Let's try and break it down a little bit. Starting with something that Helen and Leanne, you both mentioned, which was around the need to address social determinants. How do we get governments and non-health services to understand their role in addressing mental illness and enhancing mental health through social determinants. So those areas which you touched on, Helen, in terms of prevention and early intervention, the education system, housing, how do we get those other areas to understand their importance in people's mental health?
Well, I'll just jump in quickly there and say, look, it's also government. It's not just community, because I think, and John raised this issue, you know, why is our suicide rate decreased? I mean, there's been a lot of activity in various sections over the last few years in trying to improve using a kind of systems approach activity model where everybody in the community is contributing to reducing suicide. But a key government initiative was to actually change the economics viability of many people and organisations through Jobkeeper and Jobseeker. This was a huge thing, and it made a difference, I really believe. And I believe some people were better off in that system prior to not having COVID. So I think that there are interesting roles. It's not just how do we get the community involved. I think it's about making good policy decisions about how you actually support the viability of organisations and of people in general.
The experience with Jobseeker in particular is quite fascinating, and I've heard a number of people refer to Jobseeker as one of the most influential mental health initiatives in recent history.
So Tim,
and essentially because it addresses that economic disadvantage, social determinant of mental health. John.
Tim, this is the great realisation by government, I hope in particular, but I hope also by the mental health sector, that not every solution dollar to mental health comes from the health budget. This demonstrates that when you put money in people's banks, put a roof over their head, increase their welfare, that you improve people's mental health. And I think the fact that, you know, in 2020 in particular, we saw the government put two hands around people, put the social policy arm and the economic policy arm around people, actually demonstrated that it's more than just the mental health budget solutions that will provide a better environment in which people will thrive and prosper and live a better and more fulfilling life. So that's one of the lessons we learned, a very clear lesson we learned. And the way we're going at the moment, it looks like we're reversing out of those lessons and not taking heed of them very, very quickly. And this is where I think Helen and Leanne, you'll have a better view than me, but, you know, this is where your classic cost benefit analysis comes in. You know, the cost of paying higher welfare up front, if that leads to a lower cost in outlay in mental health support because you're giving people a better life, let's do those sums much more effectively.
I think extend that to the cost of the burden of disease on people's lives as well. Leanne.
Jump in, thank you. I just pay tribute to Christine Morgan as the Prime Minister's Suicide Prevention Advisor and the policy development that's come from her work in the space of suicide prevention, which has really tried to lift the spotlight, to broaden it from mental health into health and into the broader system. And that really is throwing a challenge down to governments at all levels. So when Helen speaks about, you know, what are we doing in schools, we need to talk to state governments about their intervention through the schools and an integration between the, you know, national curriculum and what happens on the ground in terms of support systems in schools. And that's a multi-jurisdictional complexity that, you know, we know and love in Australia, these multi-jurisdictional issues at layers of government. And, you know, rather than kind of be overwhelmed by it, we have to take the bull by the horns, because the science tells us that prevention and early intervention makes a huge difference. And social and dealing with people's anxiety about where they live, who they live with, what they do, and how they're going to survive are hugely important in their sense of well-being going forward. And we've learned that, haven't we, kind of in a really stark way through the pandemic. And people's disconnection and their loneliness, their isolation from family, and this idea that people are grappling with now, that some are calling the Great Resignation, I think is really just people thinking about what matters to me in my life. Where is it worth my priorities being, and how do I manage that and balance financial sustainability and participation? So, you
know what's important, Leanne, is we've learnt that lesson. There's no hiding anymore, right?
Oh, that's right.
We've had a once-in-a-century crisis that has taught us some really solid lessons that have proved some of the hypotheses that people like you and Helen have been talking about your entire career. It's actually proved them. So there's no more room to say, oh, well, we don't know. We absolutely know a whole lot of things, courtesy of COVID, about people's mental health that we thought made sense, we thought were right. Well, we've proved it, maybe disproved as well, but proved a hell of a lot of these things. And, literally putting money up front in people's bank accounts in their pension, using the old language, down the track is money saved potentially in their mental health care. I mean, it is, just as you're right about, and that's another form of potentially early prevention. And I think we need to, and the Productivity Commission report was important here that Helen talked about, because it's getting mental health off the health-only agenda onto the productivity, the economic agenda. But I liked what you said, Helen, which is, are we failing? And, new ideas, smart ideas are the enemy of implementation. We sort of, I don't know what you think, Helen, but I reckon we know it all, or at least we know enough to get moving. The old, we don't need another bloody report. God save us from another report. It's all out there. Just get moving on it, I think is if I heard your message right, Helen, is exactly the case, and I back you 100% on that.
I think one of the things that, and this maybe reflects my Treasury background, but accountability for implementation and for performance is absolutely crucial. And both Helen and Leanne, you touched on that in your opening comments. How can we raise the bar on monitoring and management of performance and implementation?
Well, I'll jump in this time. I think that CEDA has had some foresight in finishing up your set of these discussions with the focus on implementation. And I'm with John. I'm optimistic about that, but it's going to take leadership and coordination, and implementation has to be led and informed by the science, those that do the work every day and those that live and experience the services every day. And until that happens, it won't be well-informed implementation. But we have a huge problem in different areas of our social and health services system about counting widgets and occasions of service rather than counting the impact and outcomes in people's lives, or doing that alongside counting the investment or the cost of a particular intervention. And until we get our focus onto the outcomes for people in their lives, we won't be able to know and be truly accountable for the investment of the funding. And to get to that leadership, and we also need data systems. We need data systems that are useful and tell us what we need to know. And we don't have those yet in this space in mental health. We just don't.
Again, probably goes back to my Treasury experience, but data saves lives. It absolutely saves lives because it informs decisions, and that informs implementation. I think one of the things that's incredibly important in the mental health space is not just the measurement and monitoring of outcomes, but also the measurement and monitoring of client and patient experience. And in the mental health space, the experience is so important to people's recovery as well. Helen, your comments on accountability and how we can up the ante
Okay, well, I was introduced as the director and chief scientist of Black Dog Institute, which is no longer the case. I've actually stepped down, and Sam Harvey is now the director of the institute and will do a fantastic job. So now I can really say what I think, and it's going to be an interesting journey. Because I think we get reports back on the major reforms that have happened in Australia over the last 10 years. They're not always super positive, but there's no outcome as a result of it. You find that there've been these major initiatives. There doesn't seem to be any difference whether that initiative was put into place or not. Well, what happens? Nobody seems to hold anyone to account, in my view. So I'm with Leanne. We need data and we need impact. And it's not just the number of people running through the services, it's the actual impact that's being had, and the accountability has to be there. There's no money unless you can actually deliver,
John, your thoughts on accountability?
I don't have much to add other than to agree with Helen and Leanne completely.
Going to issues...
Sorry, I will add one thing.
Okay, John.
Every time somebody dies on the road, it's a story on the television that night, and we actively talk about things like road tolls, and we talk about deaths on roads, and we say, oh, this year we're ahead or behind last year, and blah, 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 and we should also take into consideration the fact there's more people driving more cars that are faster but safer and all of that. If the people of Australia really knew, and I'm taking a sharp end here, really knew that 8 to 9 Australians took their lives on average every day, and that's the death toll from suicide every day, that it's the largest single cause of death for Australians under 44, I think there'd be riots on the streets, right? I think people would be a lot angrier than they are. And sometimes I think maybe we need to get a bit angrier about some of this to drive some of these conclusions. But the other point I'd add, I guess, to what Helen and Leanne said is we need to set timeframes with targets. That's what and they are easy to do. People will always tell you, oh, very hard to do in mental health. Well, bullshit, let's just get on with it, eh? It's time to actually do some of that and be. The problem is governments don't want to be held to account on some of these targets because they mightn't be achieved. Well, better to get 80% of a target than set no target at all and not, as Helen said, not be able to sit down and measure properly.
Yeah. Going forward in implementation, workforce is going to be crucial, and just looking at one of the questions that's come through from the audience to pigeonhole. The question / opening statement is, we've seen competition for skills across the care economy, and NDIS has certainly upped the ante in that space. And the competition for skills in some respects has been exacerbated by skills shortage due to the pause in migration. So the question is, does Australia have the skills pipeline required to improve care? And if we don't have it, how can we create it? Leanne, your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, look, Minister Hunt made a decision to set up a process for doing a national mental health workforce strategy last year. Very welcome piece of work, and Mental Health Australia's had the opportunity to be involved in that task force, and people have been consulted with, and there's lots of feedback, and that work is ongoing. I guess what's challenging is that in the face of the productivity inquiry report and the suicide prevention advice I previously mentioned, and lots of the science that Helen has spoken to, and our understanding of what's happened during the pandemic, we are now in a position where we really do need to have an action plan going forward around all of that, and understand what kind of services need to be offered in Australia, and then what kind of workforce we might need. And so it's kind of a bit chicken and egg, or maybe cart before horse, in my view, having a look at the workforce, because we certainly, if we want to do more of the same, we need more of the same workforce. But if we want to be innovative, if we want to listen and work with and raise the profile of experience as workers themselves in the system and as leaders themselves in the system, we need to do some thinking about who needs what. So, for example, we don't need a paediatrician, specialist paediatrician, to put a Band-Aid on a child in the playground at school. Others can do that, even the other children can do that. The paediatricians are needed for really very sick young children. And I think sometimes we're not smart about where we see the workforce responding and which parts of the workforce should respond to which level of need. And so there is a need to think about the whole continuum of care and increase the throughput, the pipeline, the attractiveness of the work and the support systems for people doing the work right across the continuum of care, from early intervention and prevention right through to the care of people who are seriously unwell and needing the acute end of the mental health system.
Thank you, Leanne. Helen, your thoughts on workforce? You touched on youth and peers before.
Yeah, I think we do have the people for certain things. I do think what we need to do now is amplify the whole mass of people out there who can help, you know, teachers, parents, community, youth workers, peer support more formally, et cetera, et cetera. We're always going to need treatment and direct help from psychiatry and all the rest. I mean, people actually do appreciate those services, but their place, as Leanne says, is in a particular sphere or in conjunction with what else can be provided by the community. I'd say in my own circumstances, what I find we don't have and where the pipeline has failed is in the technology to deliver the digital services that we're trying to develop. And at the moment, we're currently talking to people in the US about that. And so I think there is a problem that we don't have that and we haven't funded it. I see no action on us developing more psychologists or psychiatrists. It doesn't seem to be an expanding issue yet. I mean, we can be more helpful in being able to say, well, let's do blended care, which is highly effective. And even automated care is highly effective compared to poor face-to-face treatment. So, you know, essentially it's about amplification. I'd also like to throw in that we need more research, and we need more researchers in mental health, and we need more Indigenous voices in both research and the mental health workforce.
I'm glad you raised the Indigenous voice, because I think we have a great deal to learn about social and emotional well-being and spirituality in bettering our mental health. John, your thoughts on workforce and maybe from a Lifeline perspective in terms of sustaining a workforce?
Helen's right. We don't have the workforce, and the risk as we encourage and want more people to present to get help is the pressures on the workforce will accelerate massively. Helen, you might know this, but I heard a suggestion that the College of Psychiatrists haven't registered people, new psychiatrists for 2 years or something.
I'm not sure. I could follow up and get back to you on that.
I don't know, it was something weird I heard. Leanne, you're nodding your head. I hope you're wrong. I hope you're right and I'm wrong. But, you know, right down to mental health nurses, we've got a crisis coming. In terms of Lifeline, we're asking people who volunteer in many cases and who are trained to do some volunteering work, you know, helping people at extremely distressing times of those person's life. So for us, maintaining and supporting our workforce has always been a big issue. So the opportunity for us, not unlike what Helen referred to, is technology. You know, how can we make it? How can we make more contact with people with better use of technology? Lifeline has just gone to 24-hour, 7 days a week text. We're building up from 12 hours a day up to 24, and we just started that some weeks ago. We're getting about, I don't know, 300-400 texts a day. We get 3,000 calls a day. It can't be long before we're getting 3,000 texts and 3,000 calls a day, to be honest. So that'll require us to increase our workforce. So from our perspective, we have people of excellent intent who do excellent work, but it's a lot harder than volunteering at your kid's barbecue between 1 and 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon for the soccer match. I mean, we're asking a lot of people and we support them as strongly as we can, but we risk burnout all the time.
Yeah. And I think it's probably worth us acknowledging and thanking all of those that work in the mental health space, because it is difficult work and it's hard space to be in and stay in. So, yeah, a shout out to all those who work in mental health, and thank you. I'm going to go rapid fire questions now because we're running out of time, and we could be having this chat, I think, for another couple of hours quite easily. But let's go to pigeonhole rapid fire questions, answers 25 words or less. One question being, with elective surgery backlog likely to take 5 years to clear in Victoria and New South Wales, and misdiagnoses under COVID, are you worried that mental health is going to take a back seat due to the broader pressures across the health system? Leanne?
No, because I think that we need to be planning responses that assume that there is no health without mental health, and that mental health needs to be part of every care continuum and clinical guideline, and it's not a separate issue. It's not separate from healthcare. It's all part of it. That was 25 words, right?
Yeah. John?
Okay.
I agree with Leanne. I'm just balancing out some of her 25 words.
Excellent. Helen?
Well, surgery is an interesting word to apply to to mental health problems, but essentially, yes, physical and mental health have to go together. I mean, there is, I think, huge pressure on emergencies departments to cope with the mental health people coming in. There's a huge number of them, and I think, that is putting people off turning up, though they seem to be turning up and probably not getting the kind of follow-up treatment that's absolutely needed after that encounter.
Yeah. Further question from Pigeonhole, and it relates to workforce from an employer's perspective. So as an employer seeing the impact of COVID and lockdowns on staff mental health and burnout, what key sort of practical recommendations can you suggest to help our workforces deal with ongoing uncertainty and mental health issues and that issue of fatigue and burnout?
So I'd jump in there and say that there are a range of digital products that can be accessed from Black Dog Institute, but many other places that provide specific help. At the moment, we have a service called 10, which is also for mental health professionals to work through a range of potential options. But what I see is that businesses aren't going to have any more of this, and they're actually setting up to try and establish their own means and mechanisms to provide this sort of care to their staff. And that's one of the things that kind of is great, but it also concerns me because it'll only be people who are employed who will be getting these high-level services. And whether we end up in a system like the US, where you have people getting insurance for their mental health problems as part of their organisational employment, is a really interesting question, because again, it's going to increase that divide between people with and without resources.
Thank you, Helen. Leanne?
Yes, I think that, thank you. I think there are some great resources at the Black Dog and in other places, including the the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. Can I just also say, though, that we haven't really touched on the work, if we're going to talk about social determinants and people with mental illness or mental health issues needing some care from a range of providers, not just people within the mental health system, that we also need to be supporting the aged care workforce, the disability workforce, the justice workforce, the people in ED, as Helen mentioned before, who are dealing with people with mental ill health as part of their work every day. And that's one of the challenges I think going forward. They are workforces that are really important. And we haven't touched on the really important kind of context of workplace support and the increasing challenges of supporting people who are unwell or unhappy at work. And I agree with Helen, you have to be employed to access those supports. And so there is a whole lot of people who are not employed who are not able to access them.
Thank you, Leanne. And finally to you, John.
I'm really worried about small businesses. Organisations of a certain size can employ people in programs. They have a wider knowledge of what's available, and they know how to go to a black dog, or they know how to buy in services. The 5 people in the car repair shop, how do they access services? And I know they're online and available, as Helen said, but how do they have the time and the capacity between working their backsides off to service customers and earn $1 to actually spend some time that we have, in corporate offices, in large buildings or with large workforces. So small business is a massive employer in Australia. So I worry about small businesses missing out altogether.
I think Lifeline has some approaches to small businesses as well to be able to assist in that way, John, you're right.
No, I agree, Helen, but it helps if you've got an HR department or a people and culture department who've got the time to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, John, Leanne and Helen. That's been a great conversation. I wish we could go for longer. We've got a couple of questions on Pigeonhole that I'll just highlight for people to think about. One is, do you think that government should fund a mental health course for parents, as they do with some other courses when you have a child? Some instructions when you get a child will be really good. It's the only time a male will actually look to read instructions, and there aren't any. The second question is a really important one for us all to consider, and that is, how do we protect marginalised groups such as LGBTIQ+ people from the mental health impact of political debates, such as those on Religious Freedom Bill? And we saw that play out in the marriage equality debate as well. So something for us all to reflect on. In summation, I think in various ways, John, Helen and Leanne, you all touched on the importance of accountability and implementation. Helen and Leanne in particular, you highlighted the importance of the national agreement. I think the national agreement is a unique and incredibly valuable opportunity to drive accountability and implementation. I implore governments to make the most of that opportunity and decision makers to make the most of that opportunity to achieve meaningful and lasting shift in the mental health system and the mental health of Australians. So with that closing note, I will hand back to Clint. I would like to congratulate and thank CEDA for running this series on mental health. And on behalf of Nous Group, we've been delighted to be involved. So congratulations and thanks to CEDA. Back to you, Clint.
Thanks very much, Tim. Let me just wrap up briefly by thanking John, Leanne and Helen for giving us your time and your minds today. And to Tim for facilitating a great conversation for us all. It's not every day that somebody uses the word and calls bullshit on the CEDA platform. And John, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. As many of you know, it's part of the reason why CEDA exists, to question, to inform, to challenge and to debate. So I had dared not ever say that word, but now that you've done that and led by example, John, I might go rogue. So thank you. That's called leading by example. Thanks again to the Nous Group as well for your ongoing support of CEDA's work in this area. We will, of course, reconvene next year when we come together to discuss some key issues that we have raised here today, including the digital delivery of mental health services and the role of businesses in supporting mental health within the workplace. We'll also be undertaking analysis of the Great Resignation and how that actually manifests here in Australia, and also be questioning the future of data sovereignty, who owns your data, how it's used, and how it's used to inform investment and policy decisions. All of that coming up in the first quarter of next year. If you'd like to know more about any of that work, please do get in touch with us directly. Please do take a minute before you log off to use the Pigeonhole app or the link on your screen to provide any feedback and rank today's discussion for us. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for your time and participation in the discussion. The session has been recorded and can be shared via a live stream link with your colleagues shortly. You can keep up to date with any of CEDA's work, of course, by visiting our website, ceda.com.au, or connecting with us on social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. That's it for us this afternoon. Take care of each other, go well, and have an excellent weekend.